It was a Saturday afternoon in Florida, the sun blaring down with relentless heat as Miles Corbin, the protagonist, took to waxing his cherry-red Ferrari affectionately known as Scarlet. This car wasn't just any car to Miles, it symbolized both the hard work he had put in to pay off his student loans and the extravagant purchase he made with his inheritance. The Ferrari, gleaming under the bright sun, represented a culmination of Miles' hard work and his desire to reward himself for financial independence. He described Scarlet not merely as a car, but as a statement: "I finally paid off my student loans and decided to blow my inheritance on something completely impractical." This line highlights a humorous, almost self-deprecating tone, establishing Miles as a relatable, yet playful character who doesn't take himself too seriously. He clearly enjoys the pride in owning such a luxurious vehicle, yet he is also conscious of how impractical it is, adding a layer of depth to his personality. The tranquility of Miles' car maintenance is soon shattered by the appearance of Karen, the archetypical character who disrupts Miles' peaceful Saturday. The introduction of Karen is almost immediate, as she is described as a Platinum Edition Karen, someone who embodies every frustrating stereotype about entitled individuals. Her wardrobe choice, a vibrant almost radioactive green tracksuit, serves as a visual cue, signaling her assertiveness and refusal to blend into her surroundings. The humor here is also evident in the description of her physical presence. Her expression suggested she just found a rogue Cheerio in her organic gluten-free granola. The juxtaposition of such a trivial issue with a larger sense of self-importance is a hallmark of the Karen stereotype. The confrontation begins when Karen approaches Miles and demands to speak with the owner of the vehicle. Miles, clearly familiar with the nature of this interaction, responds in a polite but resigned manner, confirming that he is the car's owner. The narrative quickly shifts from polite pleasantries to absurdity when Karen asserts that the Ferrari is rightfully mine. Here, we see the key conflict. Karen believes she has the entitlement to take ownership of Miles' expensive car for a charity event, merely because she deems it a deserved donation. The situation escalates further as Karen, now identified as Bernice Butterfield, claims that the car is necessary for her charity event, Save the Manatees, and insists that Miles donate it. This unrealistic demand, combined with the complete disregard for Miles' personal property, is portrayed as both comical and infuriating. Miles reacts to the demand with disbelief, and humorously points out that the car costs more than the charity could likely raise in a year. His response not only provides comedic relief but also subtly critiques the absurdity of Bernice's request. He asserts that his car isn't a free resource for anyone who asks, particularly someone who has no right to it. His logic is clear: one cannot just demand someone else's property. This line of reasoning, grounded in common sense and personal responsibility, contrasts sharply with Karen's entitlement and sets the stage for the coming conflict. The scene closes with Karen growing increasingly enraged, ultimately pulling out her phone to call the police. The absurdity of the situation intensifies, as Miles expresses amusement at the idea of being reported to the authorities for refusing to give away his Ferrari. At this moment, the reader anticipates a typical encounter with law enforcement, but what follows will be anything but ordinary. The setup in this first part is rich with humor, with clear character contrasts between the carefree, self-aware Miles and the entitled, demanding Karen, setting the tone for the chaotic escalation that follows. Karen, now fully engaged in her mission, whipped out her phone with the kind of speed that suggested she had rehearsed such moments many times before. She dialed 911, her fingers shaky, but her voice strong as she began recounting her version of events. Miles watched in disbelief, leaning against his car and crossing his arms, a mixture of amusement and mild frustration crossing his face. He was fully aware that this would be a ridiculous encounter, but the spectacle of it all still seemed almost too absurd to be real. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked, her voice calm and unfazed by the impending storm of entitlement about to hit. I am being harassed. Karen screeched, her voice climbing in pitch. This man is refusing to donate his car to my charity event. It's a red Ferrari, and I need it. He's denying the community access to this beautiful color. Her words were rapid, almost manic, as if the absurdity of her demand could be masked by sheer volume. Miles raised an eyebrow, fighting the urge to laugh at the thought of someone being harassed simply for not giving away a sports car. "Harassed?" he muttered under his breath. "I think you're the one doing the harassing, lady. I'm just trying to enjoy my Saturday." The 911 operator, however, didn't seem fazed by the escalating drama. She remained calm, and despite Karen's outburst, she maintained an even tone, likely having encountered much stranger calls. "Ma'am, is there any violence occurring?" "Not yet," Karen snapped, as though it were a mere matter of time. "But there will be if he doesn't hand over the keys. He is refusing to cooperate with the needs of the manatees." Miles chuckled at the absurdity of it all. She was demanding a Ferrari for her manatee charity event, and now she was threatening violence over it. He glanced at his car again, appreciating the glossy shine of the paint. Was this really happening? The operator responded with practiced professionalism, "Ma'am, we cannot force someone to donate their property. This sounds like a civil matter." Bernice's face twisted into a look of sheer disbelief, her eyes wide with outrage. "Civil matter? This is an outrage. I demand you send the police immediately. I know the chief of police." Miles half expected the operator to roll her eyes, but instead, the call continued. The operator said, "All right, ma'am. We'll send an officer to assess the situation." Karen, with a look of triumph on her face, hung up the phone, her expression now smug as she stood straighter, as if she had won some battle. "You'll be sorry, young man," she spat at Miles, her eyes narrowing as she turned toward the squad cars now pulling up to his driveway. "Just you wait," she muttered under her breath. Miles simply shook his head, still amused by the spectacle. He muttered to himself, "This is going to be good," and leaned back on Scarlett, preparing for the next absurd chapter in this bizarre showdown. To Miles' surprise, the squad cars arrived faster than he expected. In a matter of minutes, 2 cruisers pulled into his driveway, their sirens turned off but lights flashing as they parked. Miles raised an eyebrow at the rapid response. The officers, clearly confused by the situation, stepped out of their vehicles and looked between Bernice and Miles, trying to make sense of the conflicting stories. One officer was a fresh-faced rookie, probably just a few weeks on the job, his wide eyes showing how out of his depth he felt. The other officer, however, was a seasoned veteran, Officer Miller, whose face bore the weight of years of dealing with difficult people in the community. Miles could see that Miller had the same look most people get when they encounter a particularly challenging Karen. The exhaustion was palpable, like he had seen this kind of thing too many times. Bernice, seeing the opportunity to perform her best damsel-in-distress routine, rushed toward the officers with flailing arms, launching into her version of the story. She began recounting how Miles was being uncooperative, and how he was selfish, refusing to donate the Ferrari to her cause, one she claimed was vital for the local community. Miles couldn't help but feel a little empathy for the rookie officer, whose eyes widened with every new absurdity Bernice piled onto her story. She painted him as a villain in this drama, even though the whole situation was rooted in entitlement and unrealistic expectations. After letting Bernice finish her tirade, Miles calmly explained his side of the story. "Officer, I own this car. She wants it for free, plain and simple," Miles said, his voice unbothered. "Is there a law against owning a red Ferrari and not wanting to give it away?" Officer Miller, who had been rubbing his temple in resignation, finally spoke up, his voice as calm and measured as could be. "Ma'am," he said, turning toward Bernice. "As the young man said, he is not obligated to give you his property. This is a free country, and that includes his right to keep his car." Bernice's face scrunched up in anger. But the manatees and my charity event," she stammered, clutching her phone as if it were a weapon. Officer Miller sighed, his voice becoming tinged with frustration. "I understand your intentions, ma'am. But that doesn't give you the right to demand someone else's possessions." He glanced at the rookie officer, who seemed to be absorbing this interaction as if he were watching a circus act. There's nothing we can do here, Miller finished, shaking his head, clearly ready to wrap up the whole bizarre situation. Miles figured that would be the end of it. Bernice would huff, puff, and storm off, probably leaving a negative Yelp review or badmouthing him on social media. But he had grossly underestimated her. To Miles' disbelief, Bernice wasn't ready to give up just yet. She had other plans, and it seemed the situation was about to take another unexpected turn. As Officer Miller wrapped up his explanation, Miles thought it was finally over. That's when Bernice, with an almost comic level of indignation, spun back toward the officers. "Are you telling me," she shrieked, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at Officer Miller, "that you're siding with him over a respected member of this community?" Miles could practically see the veins popping out of her neck as she continued her tirade. "I know the mayor. I know the chief of police. You have to listen to me." At that moment, something strange happened. Officer Miller, who had been handling the situation with impressive restraint until now, suddenly straightened up. A strange, almost unnatural glint flickered in his eyes. Miles watched, confused. Was he witnessing a sudden shift? Had Officer Miller decided to take the side of justice in a truly unexpected way? "You know what, ma'am?" Officer Miller said, his voice uncharacteristically calm, almost eerily so. "You're absolutely right. This is an outrage. A real, genuine outrage." Bernice blinked, thrown off by this unexpected turn of events. She was clearly unprepared for the officer to side with her, but in the most sarcastic way possible. "I am absolutely," Officer Miller continued, nodding in exaggerated agreement, "outraged that someone would be so inconsiderate, so utterly lacking in empathy that they would refuse to contribute to such a worthy cause as saving the manatees." Miles stood there in utter disbelief, trying to process what he was hearing. Was this an elaborate setup? Was Miller playing some kind of game? The rookie officer, too, seemed completely out of his element, his face reflecting sheer confusion. But Officer Miller wasn't done yet. He turned to Miles, his face hardening as if he was about to reprimand him. "Mr. Corbin," he said in a surprisingly stern tone, "as a member of this community, I am deeply disappointed in your behavior. You have a beautiful vehicle. Yes. But what good is it if you're not using it to help those in need? Shame on you." The moment was beyond surreal. Miles stared at Officer Miller, mouth slightly agape. Was he being scolded by the very officer who was supposed to be neutral in this situation? The rookie officer looked back and forth between them, clearly unsure of how to react. And just when Miles thought he couldn't be more flabbergasted, Officer Miller turned back to Bernice, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Ma'am, I apologize for this man's appalling behavior," he said, giving her a mock sympathetic look. "I assure you we will do everything in our power to rectify this situation." Before Miles could react, Officer Miller pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "What?" Miles stammered. "What are you doing, Officer Miller?" Ignoring him, Miller turned to Bernice, now playing his role as the hero. "Ma'am," he said, his tone smooth as silk, "I am placing you under arrest." "Arrest for what?" Miles asked, completely dumbfounded. Impersonating a person in need of a vehicle, Miller explained with a straight face. "I asked you for the proper donation forms, but you do not have them. That's fraud. Trying to collect funds with no official paperwork." Bernice sputtered, trying to salvage her pride. "But the manatees?" She protested weakly, her face turning a deep shade of purple. Officer Miller, completely unflustered, snapped the handcuffs onto Bernice's wrists. "Unfortunately, ma'am," he said, his voice almost casual, "you don't have the proper documentation to prove you are authorized to collect donations. Therefore, we have to take you in for questioning. It's standard procedure." He shot Miles a wink, almost as if to assure him that he was not, in fact, losing his mind. The rookie officer, finally finding his voice, asked hesitantly, Officer Miller, are you sure this is protocol?" "Absolutely," Johnson, Miller responded with a smooth confidence. We can't have people running around claiming to raise money for noble causes without the proper permits. It's a matter of public safety. As Bernice was led away, still sputtering and protesting, the rookie officer trailed nervously behind. Officer Miller gave Miles a final wink and a discreet thumbs up as he escorted Bernice to the patrol car. Miles stood frozen, still processing the absurdity of what had just happened. His Ferrari, gleaming in the sunlight, was still parked in the driveway, untouched by the chaos that had just unfolded. Bernice, the entitled Karen who had hoped to take it for herself, was now in the back of a squad car, being driven away for fraud. For Miles, this was officially the weirdest Saturday afternoon of his life. The fallout from Bernice's arrest didn't take long to hit. Word spread like wildfire through Harrow Creek Estates, and soon everyone seemed to know the story. It wasn't just about a man refusing to give away his Ferrari anymore. No, this had become the stuff of legend, a tale of a Karen who demanded a luxury car for free, only to be arrested for fraud. The entire neighborhood had been swept into the spectacle, and Miles, to his bemusement, had become an unwilling hero. Miles had been preparing to return to his car after watching Officer Miller and the rookie officer drive off with Bernice, but the media frenzy that followed made that impossible. As soon as the police cruisers were out of sight, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his friend Steve. "Dude, you're gonna be on the news. Bernice just got arrested for charity fraud. This is unreal." Within hours, local news stations picked up the story, and the headline flashed across screens: Karen arrested for charity fraud after Ferrari fiasco. The absurdity of it all was too good to be true. The footage quickly went viral, and soon, people from all over the country were laughing at the spectacle. The story, which seemed so bizarre at the time, became a sensation, with reporters reaching out for interviews and social media users chiming in with their thoughts on how crazy the whole thing was. But as the day went on, it turned out that the story had layers Miles hadn't expected. It wasn't just that Bernice had tried to get his car for free, she had been using her so-called Save the Manatees charity to funnel money into her own lavish lifestyle. The charity event, she claimed to need the Ferrari for, wasn't about saving marine life at all. Instead, it was a ruse, a scheme designed to raise funds for a party at her country club, with the Ferrari acting as a flashy raffle prize. The money, of course, was meant to line her pockets. Officer Miller's arrest, while unorthodox, had uncovered a major scandal. Bernice's fraudulent activities had been going on for years, and the community was stunned by the revelations. The news outlets continued to spin the tale, with investigative pieces revealing how Bernice had tried to manipulate the system and even pocket donations meant for charity. In the aftermath of the arrest, Officer Miller found himself under investigation for his unconventional methods, but rather than facing backlash, he was hailed as a hero. People in the community, grateful for someone finally standing up to the entitled elites, flooded him with thank you notes, free coffee, and even a key to the city. Miller became known locally as the Karen Crusher, a nickname he wore with a mixture of pride and slight embarrassment. Meanwhile, Miles had unintentionally become something of a local celebrity. People stopped him on the street to congratulate him for standing up to Bernice and refusing to give in to her demands. His inbox was full of requests for interviews, and even local commercials offered him roles, promising fame and fortune for doing something as simple as maintaining his own property. But as much as the attention was flattering, it wasn't the kind of fame Miles had ever sought. What he truly valued was that his Ferrari was still his. His prized possession was untouched, and more importantly, he had witnessed a moment of justice unfold before his eyes. For Bernice, however, things were looking grim. As the media continued to report on her charity fraud scheme, she was facing serious charges. In addition to the fraud, investigators found evidence of tax evasion and other financial misdeeds. She eventually pleaded guilty to a lesser charge and was sentenced to community service. The irony was rich: she, who had tried to take what wasn't hers, would spend her days cleaning up the very environment she claimed to care about. Months later, Miles drove by a local dock where he spotted Bernice in an orange jumpsuit, scrubbing algae off a dock. As their eyes met, there was a fleeting moment where Miles thought he saw something in her eyes that wasn't anger, perhaps a bit of regret. But it was brief. With a satisfied grin, he revved his Ferrari's engine and drove off into the sunset, leaving Bernice to face her own fate. As for the Save the Manatees charity, it had lost all credibility, and the community had become more vigilant about similar scams. Miles' encounter with Bernice was a lesson learned for everyone. No one was above the law, not even Karen. And so, as the saga ended, Miles couldn't help but smile. This would certainly be a story he'd tell for years to come. The fallout from Bernice's arrest wasn't just confined to the neighborhood. As news of her fraudulent charity event and her failed attempt to claim Miles' Ferrari spread, the entire community found itself under scrutiny. The story went viral, catching the attention of local news outlets and even some national platforms. People were fascinated by the audacity of the situation. But as Miles quickly discovered, the ripple effects were far-reaching. Despite the media circus surrounding Bernice's arrest, the attention shifted to Miles. He had become an accidental celebrity, and it was starting to get overwhelming. Everywhere he went, people stopped him to offer congratulations. His phone buzzed constantly with texts and calls from friends, family, and even strangers, all offering their admiration for standing up to such an entitled Karen. It was surreal. Miles had just wanted to enjoy a peaceful Saturday afternoon with his car, but now he was a symbol of resistance against unfair demands. His newfound fame also meant more opportunities. Local businesses started approaching him with offers to feature in commercials. A smoothie shop wanted him to promote their product, and even a car dealership suggested they could use his story to sell more luxury vehicles. At first, he was flattered, but the attention quickly began to feel overwhelming. He found himself avoiding public spaces, unsure how to handle the sudden onslaught of media inquiries. But amidst the chaos, there were some positives. For one, Officer Miller, who had initially faced an internal investigation for his unconventional arrest tactics, had become a local hero. The media quickly dubbed him the Karen Crusher, and he was celebrated as the voice of reason in a town too often plagued by entitled residents. He had dealt with more than his fair share of difficult people, but his decision to arrest Bernice for fraud, rather than indulging her tantrum, had earned him the respect of the community. Miles had been somewhat surprised by the public's reaction. He never thought his refusal to hand over a Ferrari would lead to him being treated like a folk hero. However, as the story continued to spread, he realized that what he had done was bigger than just standing up to an entitled woman. It was about making sure that people understood that no one should have the right to take what wasn't theirs, no matter how important their cause seemed. One afternoon, Miles received a message from an old friend, Sarah, who had seen the viral story online. She was in town visiting family and suggested they meet for coffee. Miles hadn't seen her in years, but they had always gotten along well. He figured it would be nice to catch up after everything that had happened. They met at a local cafe, where Sarah congratulated him on his heroic actions. "I can't believe you're actually a local celebrity now," Sarah laughed, sitting across from him at the small table. "You've gone from a history teacher to a viral sensation." Miles chuckled, feeling both a sense of pride and exhaustion. "It's definitely not what I expected when I bought the car," he said, shaking his head. "I was just trying to have a relaxing weekend and enjoy Scarlett, and now I'm being offered all these deals and commercials. It's a bit much." Sarah smiled knowingly. "I can imagine. But you've done something important, Miles. You've shown that you won't back down in the face of entitlement. That's something people admire." The conversation turned to more personal matters as Sarah told Miles about her recent travels and the work she was doing with a non-profit organization. It was refreshing for Miles to talk about something other than the chaos that had engulfed his life in the past week. As the afternoon passed, he realized that the whole experience had shifted his perspective. While the attention was flattering, he had started to feel more like a bystander in his own life. The true reward, he realized, wasn't in the recognition, it was in knowing that he had done the right thing. Bernice had taken something that wasn't hers, and by standing firm, Miles had made sure there were consequences. Later that evening, as he sat in his driveway, staring at Scarlett, Miles couldn't help but smile. The car was still his, and the drama was finally starting to fade. There was a sense of peace in that. He had faced a Karen and come out victorious. But more than that, he had reminded the community, and himself, that fairness and respect for others' property was a principle worth defending. As the weeks passed, the town seemed to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the echoes of Bernice's arrest still lingered in the air. Harrow Creek Estates had never been a particularly tight-knit community, but the events surrounding Miles' refusal to give away his Ferrari had sparked something in the residents. People began to speak out more openly about issues that had long been swept under the rug, whether it was about unfair HOA policies, local charity frauds, or entitlement among certain residents. The most noticeable change, however, was the shift in how people treated Miles. Before the Ferrari debacle, he had been just another quiet history teacher, living in the background of suburban life. Now, he found himself at the center of a community-wide conversation. Neighbors would wave at him more enthusiastically when he walked to his mailbox, and even strangers stopped him on the street to offer their congratulations. It was strange to be admired for something so simple, a refusal to give in to unreasonable demands. But Miles had quickly learned that sometimes standing firm in the face of entitlement could change more than just one person's life. One evening, Miles was relaxing in his living room when his phone buzzed. It was an email from a local news outlet asking for an interview. At first, he wasn't sure if he should take it. He had already received so much attention, and part of him wanted to retreat into the normal life he had before. But as he read through the message, he realized that this was his chance to speak out on a larger platform, not just about his own experience, but about what had been uncovered through Bernice's fraudulent charity. Miles agreed to the interview, and the following week, a reporter came by his house. They sat down in his living room, and the conversation quickly shifted from his personal life to the broader implications of what had happened with Bernice. The reporter asked how he felt about the attention, and Miles responded honestly. "It's been a bit overwhelming," Miles admitted, sitting back in his chair. "I never thought a situation like this would go viral. But more than anything, it's shown me how important it is to stand up for what's right. I didn't give up my car for free because it wasn't mine to give. And I think that's something we all need to remember, that our property, our time, and our energy deserve respect." The interview, when it aired, became one of the top stories in town. Miles' simple stance had inspired many to take a closer look at the world around them. People started questioning things they had once accepted without question, whether it was the overreach of the HOA, the misuse of charitable organizations, or the sense of entitlement that some residents seemed to believe gave them the right to take from others. As for Bernice, the fallout from her arrest continued. The media relentlessly followed her trial, uncovering even more fraudulent activities within her charity. It was clear now that she had been using the charity as a front for her lavish lifestyle, skimming money from donations meant to help manatees. The town had been deceived, but it also learned an important lesson in vigilance and accountability. Months later, Miles would look back on the entire experience with a sense of pride. He hadn't just stood up for himself, he had stood up for his community, ensuring that those who abused their power would face the consequences. In a way, Miles had become more than just the guy who refused to give away his Ferrari, he had become a symbol of fairness in a world where entitlement often went unchecked. Months had passed since the infamous Ferrari incident, and life in Harrow Creek Estates had returned to its usual rhythm, at least on the surface. The media circus had long since packed up, and the public's attention had shifted to the next viral story. Miles, however, found himself still carrying the weight of his brief moment of fame. While the neighborhood had returned to its familiar hum, the lessons learned from the debacle remained firmly ingrained in his mind. One sunny afternoon, Miles found himself in his driveway, once again cleaning his car, as he did every weekend. Scarlet gleamed in the sunlight, its red paint shining as brightly as ever. It was a comforting sight, the car had become more than just a material possession, it was a reminder of how far he had come. But today, as he polished the chrome, he couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened since Bernice's arrest. He was no longer just the quiet history teacher who lived down the street. He had become a quiet symbol of resistance against entitlement. People still stopped him on the street to offer their congratulations or to ask how he had felt when the whole situation unfolded. He had to admit, he felt a sense of pride in knowing that his decision to stand his ground had made a difference in the community. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. When Miles opened it, he found Sarah standing there with a grin on her face. "I've been following your story, Miles. I had to come see how the local hero is doing," she said with a wink. Miles chuckled, inviting her in. They sat down, and as they caught up, Sarah remarked, "I always knew you were the type to stand up for what's right. But now, you've really shown everyone what it means to have integrity." Miles smiled. It felt good to hear that from someone who knew him before all the madness. The media attention, the local fame, it all felt a bit surreal, but Sarah's words reminded him of what mattered most. He had done the right thing, and that was enough. As they continued to chat, Miles couldn't help but think that this strange chapter in his life had taught him something valuable. Sometimes, doing the right thing wasn't easy, and it didn't always come with accolades. But in the end, it was always worth it. Miles' refusal to give up Scarlett had sparked a chain of events that would shape his community for years to come. And that, in itself, was a victory. The story of the Ferrari fiasco had long since faded from the media spotlight, but for Miles, it had become a chapter in his life that he would never forget. Though he hadn't asked for the attention, the experience had left an indelible mark on both him and the community. It was a reminder of the power of standing up for what was right, even in the most absurd of situations. One evening, as Miles sat on his porch, sipping a cold drink and watching the sun set, he thought back on everything that had happened. The chaotic encounter with Bernice, the media frenzy, and the way the community had rallied around him all seemed so surreal now. It was hard to believe it had all started with a simple decision to enjoy his car on a Saturday afternoon. As the months passed, Miles found himself slipping back into the routine of everyday life. The fame had died down, and people were no longer stopping him on the street to congratulate him. He was just another guy in the neighborhood again. But that didn't bother him. In fact, he found comfort in it. It meant that things had gone back to normal. Yet, every now and then, when he drove Scarlett down the street, he would catch a glance from a neighbor or a passing stranger. And for just a moment, he would remember what had happened, and the sense of pride that came with knowing he had made a difference. The whole saga had come with its share of chaos and confusion, but it had also revealed something important to Miles, the value of standing firm in the face of entitlement. It wasn't just about the Ferrari or the drama, it was about integrity, respect for others, and the willingness to speak up when something was wrong. As he sat on his porch, reflecting on everything that had transpired, Miles felt a sense of peace. He had done the right thing, and that was all that mattered.